Good morning, Mets fans, and welcome to a Thursday edition of Driving with Mr. Met. I am Mr. Met, and, I asked for a split, right? That's all I asked for. I said, if the Mets can split this series with the Twins, they're going to be in pretty good shape. I think it's a good sign. It's a good test. It's a good litmus test. And, they didn't do it. They did not split with the Twins. They swept the two-game series from the Twins. Look, I'm overexcited. I'm clearly out of my mind. But I genuinely do think the Mets are going to have a very fun second half. And they're going to be playing very competent baseball. They're going to be getting themselves back into the conversation for the playoffs in the second half. And I'm convinced of that. And until they start playing bad baseball again, well, I'm not going to be unconvinced. So I'm going to talk about the two-game set with Twinkies, the upcoming four-game set with the Giants, and a couple of things that happened over the last day and a half. It's customary for closers, I think generally speaking, most closers, it is customary for them to walk that tightrope, right? I think we certainly have, as Mets fans, our fair share of experiences with tightrope walking closers. Armando Benitez, of course, at the top of that list. John Franco, near the top of that list. Even Billy Wagner, for as good as he was never. I don't want to say never, but he had his moments, put it that way, where even he walked that tightrope. But boy, I'll tell you what, I on Tuesday night, it was like a playoff game. I was pacing for the last inning from start to finish, with Edwin Diaz loading the bases and getting out of the jam and securing a 3-2 Mets victory. That was huge for Diaz to not only for his confidence, but also just to prove, hey, I can still do this. If you noticed, he was featuring his fastball a lot more, which I think is important. Keith has said it many times that he doesn't agree with how heavily being Diaz, relies on his slider. So we'll see if this Phil Regan approach is going to change things for Edwin Diaz for the better. It's one game, right? I mean, he pitched a couple of times and he's been okay, but let's see some sustained success. I'm just saying that for the better part of 15 minutes, I was on my feet pacing. Fortunately, we don't have carpet in our basement anymore, or else I would have worn a hole through it. But the floor that we have down there now is life-proof. So that's that. Yesterday's game was a little bit different. Jason Vargas started yesterday. You know what? Before we get there, actually, let me back up one more step. So Steven Matz started the Tuesday game, and he was fine. His pitch count was elevated, and he ended up exiting the game after 4 innings. And I was sort of like, oh boy, this is a recipe for disaster. Things are not going to go well if the bullpen has to get involved this early, and blah blah blah. And after the game, everyone, even during the game, actually, Ron Darling made the comment, Mickey Callaway's pushed all the right buttons. And I'm sitting at home kind of like scratching my head, being like, he's pressed the same buttons for the last 2 months. This is just the first time the buttons actually worked. So I can't blame Mickey Callaway. I can't give Mickey Callaway credit for what happened the other night, because he's been going to the same guys for at least for the last month, 4 weeks or so. It just happened that this time they all got the job done. They all did their jobs. Amazing what happens to a bullpen, including Jerry's Familia, right? When the guys get their jobs done, it makes the manager look like a freaking genius. So I wanted to point that out. I was amused by that, and by the follow-up, of course, on Twitter as well. So, but back to yesterday's game. We're on to yesterday's game. Jason Vargas started, pitched 6 innings. controlled the Twins, kept the Mets in the game. It was a very tight game. The Mets were down 3-2, and then the Twins turned into the Mets. The Twins bullpen comes in. Dom Smith hits a absolutely clutch 3-run home run that puts the Mets up 5-3. And then a couple of batters later, or an inning later, rather, I should say, Adeiny Hechavarria is up to bat, and he flies out. Should be a fly-out routine to left field. Eddie Rosario just literally drops the ball. That opens the floodgates. The Mets end up winning end up with 14 runs. So it was 14-5 was the final. The Twins had a position player on the mound at one point. Pete Alonso hit a 474-foot cannon shot to the third deck in Target Field. It ended up being a laugher, and it was not a laugher by any means. The game was very tight. But look, at the end of the day, the bottom line is the Mets took these two games from a team that is on pace to win 100. Now, is it a fluke? We'll see. The Mets go into San Francisco tonight to face the Giants. Game time is 9:45, which I always thought was weird. I always thought the Giants started at 10:15. 7:15 local, but 6:45 start time, local time, Pacific time. I don't know why, but whatever. I guess that means that we'll be able to go to bed by 1:30 instead of 1:45 or 2 o'clock even. But Syndergaard's on the mound tonight against Madison Bumgarner, so that'll be a tough task for the Mets. And the Giants have been playing pretty well of late. So yes, they have a sub-500 record, but much like the Mets, they are looking to reverse their fortunes. It's interesting with the non waiver deadline being Dunsky, where there's no chance for anybody to make deals beyond July 31st. The Ron Darling made the comment yesterday on the broadcast about the Giants. Like, boy, we were thinking like we're going to trade Bumgarner, we're going to trade our closer Will Smith, and then they go on a little run and they're a couple of games out of the wild card, and it's like, boy, do we sell here or do we try to go for it? That's again. I think the right move for the Mets is to do both. I think the Mets can sell and still go for it. I'm not going to say that if they sell, for example, Noah Syndergaard, that it's going to guarantee that they make the playoffs this year, or that they'll play better without him than they would with him. But if the goal is to be competitive now and in the future, you have to be willing to trade some of these guys in exchange for strong assets to get in return. And if the Mets go on this little run here over the next 10 days or so, I don't envy the position that Brodie Van Eigenen will find himself in, because he'll be damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he sells and the Mets remain competitive and they end up missing the playoffs by one or two games, Mets Twitter can always point to the fact that, boy, if he didn't sell Zach Wheeler, the Mets would have won 2 of those games, because instead we had to have Walker Lockett pitch those games, or Noah Syndergaard or whatever. Or the other end of the spectrum is Brodie stands pat, doesn't trade anybody. The Mets fall apart like most of us expect, most of you expect them to, and then the criticism is, well, look, Brodie sat on his hands, didn't get anything for any of these guys. What a terrible general manager. So he really can do no right here. So it'll be interesting to see what path he decides to choose, and I think that's going to show his level of confidence in this team that he's built. And let's not forget, we've got this trade deadline acquisition who might be coming back at some point in the next 5 years. Jed Lowry, who allegedly exists, and he might just provide that offensive firepower if he ever is able to get on the field. I'm kidding about that, of course. I don't expect Jed Lowry to ever play for the Mets. It's just a running joke. But anyway, the Mets kick off this game, the series tonight with the Giants. If the Mets can get past Bumgarner tonight, who has always pitched very well against the Mets, and is just a really, really, really good pitcher, I have a really good feeling for this series itself. So I think we got to see a good, strong start from Syndergaard tonight. for the Mets to set the tone for this 4-game set. I would be, again, I mean, this is a road series. The Mets always struggle on the West Coast. I would be satisfied with a split of this series and to come away with a 4-2 road trip before going back to City to face the Padres next week. I think that would be terrific. If the Mets can somehow do better than that in San Francisco, even better. You know, the key is going to be winning series and winning trips from here on out. And I'm not talking like winning by one game. I'm talking like a multi-game, you know, for every 2 wins, 1 loss, or for every 1 loss, 2 wins, or even perhaps 3 wins. That's the only way they're going to make up ground in this wild card chase. So we just have to watch and hope, and that's what I'm going to be doing. And I'm not giving up on this team because, as I said before, there's a hell of a lot more talent here than their record indicates. So let's see if they prove me right, and then I can say I told you so. Or if they prove me wrong, and then you can say, you're nuts. And I'll say, you're right. So, I will be back tomorrow to recap tonight's game with the Giants. Until then, thanks for watching. Follow me on Twitter at Mr_Met. And as always, let's go Mets.